All right, let's dive into something a little unexpected today, Poisson distributions.
Poisson distributions.
Now, I know what you might be thinking, math
Right.
on this show,
Yeah.
but trust me on this one. This is all about understanding those seemingly random events that pop up, and they pop up a lot when we're talking about supply chains.
Yeah, Poisson distributions are really interesting. What's fascinating is they give us this framework. It helps us understand events that, yeah, they happen kind of randomly, but they have this consistent average rate.
Yeah.
It happens over time. And it's not about like pinpointing the exact moment something's going to happen.
Right.
It's more about, how likely are different scenarios.
Okay, so it's less about knowing when and more about how likely.
Exactly.
Got it. So how does that apply to the real world, though? I mean, specifically when we're talking about supply chains.
Okay, so think about a company that sells, let's say, winter coats, right? You can't predict the exact day someone's going to buy a coat, but you can look at past sales data and you can see, how many coats on average are sold per day or per week or per month.
Right.
And that average, that becomes like the key ingredient in our Poisson calculations.
So we're using past data to get a sense of future demand,
Right.
even though we know that, we can't predict what any individual customer is going to do.
Exactly.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. And this kind of leads us to inventory management.
Yes.
I mean, we've talked about this on the show before, this classic dilemma. You don't want warehouses just packed with products that aren't moving, but you also don't want to run out.
Absolutely.
Nightmare.
Big nightmare.
So how does Poisson help companies find that sweet spot? How much is too much?
Well, it's all about managing uncertainty. We don't have a crystal ball. I wish we did.
Yeah.
But what we can do is we can use Poisson.
Okay.
And we can look at that historical sales data and we can figure out, okay, what's the average demand rate for a certain product? And mathematicians, they call this lambda, that average lambda. And then using, the Poisson formula, we can calculate the probability of, okay, well, how likely are we to need, X number of units within a certain time frame?
So if lambda is, let's just say 100 coats per day on average, we can use Poisson to say, okay, what's the probability that we're only going to sell 50 tomorrow? What's the probability we're going to sell 200 tomorrow?
Exactly. And then you can use that information to figure out, well, how much inventory should I actually have on hand?
Interesting. So that brings us to this idea of reorder points.
Reorder points, yes.
So when a company knows, okay, it's time to restock,
Right.
how does Poisson fit into that?
Well, so it's that level of inventory where you say, okay, I need to place a new order
Got it.
because I don't want to run out of stock before the next shipment gets here.
Right.
And so you have to think about not only, okay, well, how much am I selling, but also how long does it take to get that new inventory in?
Lead times.
Lead times, exactly. And so let's say, your coat supplier takes, 2 weeks to deliver. Well, we can use Poisson and we can figure out, okay, over those 2 weeks, what's the probability that I'm going to sell, 50 coats? What's the probability I'm going to sell 200 coats?
Right.
And then you set that reorder point to a level that minimizes the risk of, oh no, I sold out while I'm waiting for those new coats to get here.
Got it. So even though those individual purchases are still unpredictable, the Poisson distributions help us manage that overall flow and take into account, things like lead times from our suppliers.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting is that we can apply similar logic to think about things like staffing levels.
Wait, really? So you're saying we can use Poisson to determine how many employees we need on a given day?
Absolutely. So think about like a retail store.
Okay.
They can use Poisson distributions and they can look at, okay, what are the traffic patterns? How many customers are coming in on a Monday versus a Friday versus a Saturday? And then they staff accordingly.
So instead of just kind of going with their gut or, scheduling everyone for the busiest possible day, they can look at data to figure out what's most likely.
Exactly. It's all about trying to optimize, making sure you have good customer service, but also managing your labor costs.
This is really making me think differently about how much math is kind of behind the scenes in all these everyday experiences.
All right.
I never would have thought about that for staffing. So are there other areas where this kind of pops up?
Oh, yeah, all over the place. Even something like, machine maintenance.
Oh, wow. Okay, so how does math help us maintain machines?
So you can use Poisson, you look at historical data.
Okay.
When did these machines break down?
Right.
And you can actually use that information to predict, well, how likely is it that this machine's going to have a breakdown within, let's say, the next month?
So instead of waiting for something to break down, we can use these calculations to say, okay, let's proactively schedule maintenance here, minimize that downtime.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the probability of these events and then taking action based on that information.
So this is all incredibly useful. I'm seeing that. But I imagine there are also some limitations, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because the real world is rarely as neat and tidy as, a mathematical formula.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the key assumptions built into the Poisson model is that the events have to be independent.
Independent.
Yeah. So going back to our coat example,
Okay.
one person buying a coat shouldn't affect whether or not another person buys a coat.
That makes sense. But what about things like social media trends? Everyone's suddenly got to have the same coat or a cold snap hits, right?
Yeah.
That would definitely influence people. So in those cases, that independence assumption kind of breaks down.
You got it. You hit it right on the head. That's one of the limitations. You've got these external factors, you've got promotions, you've got word of mouth. And that's where, it's really important to be aware of the limitations of the model and make adjustments as needed.
So then what about seasonality?
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about winter coats, right?
Right.
Demand is not going to be consistent throughout the year.
Yeah.
So how do we account for that? Because the basic Poisson distributions, they kind of assume that steady average.
They do. And that's another key consideration here. Seasonality.
Right.
Real life, it's rarely that simple.
Never that simple. So does that mean Poisson becomes useless in those situations?
Not at all. Not at all. It just means we have to get a little more sophisticated. We got to layer in some additional techniques.
Okay, so how do we make it work when we know that nice, steady average is just not realistic?
Well, we can incorporate historical data on these seasonal trends.
Okay.
So let's go back to those coats.
Okay.
We know from past years, demand tends to surge in the fall and the winter.
Right.
Drops off in the spring and summer.
Of course.
Yeah.
So we can use that past data to sort of adjust our Poisson calculations.
Exactly.
Make them more accurate.
And you can identify, okay, what's the typical increase? Is it a 20% increase in demand during December?
Right.
Is it a 50% increase? You look at those patterns.
And so in December, if we know historically demand is, let's say, 50% higher than the average, our calculation would factor that in.
Exactly. And that's going to give you a much more realistic probability of, okay, how many coats am I actually going to need in December?
Okay. That's starting to paint a clearer picture.
Good.
So we're using Poisson as a foundation, but then layering in these real-world things,
yes,
like seasonal patterns.
Right.
But things can get pretty complex, though, I imagine, if you've got products that have multiple peaks and valleys.
Oh, absolutely. You're talking multiple seasons. You're talking different trends.
Right.
A lot of times, companies will rely on specialized forecasting software to manage that.
Okay.
And these tools, they'll analyze, huge amounts of data.
Wow.
And they'll find those intricate seasonal patterns, and then they'll automatically adjust those Poisson calculations.
So this isn't something you want to be doing by hand with a calculator?
Not really.
Okay.
You need some heavy-duty tools.
But even with those tools, we're still relying heavily on past data, right?
Okay.
What about those unforeseen events? Those things that nobody can predict?
Yeah,
how do we account for those curveballs?
that is the million-dollar question.
Right.
Because you're right, historical data can only take us so far.
Yeah.
It's essential to layer in, human judgment, human expertise.
Yeah.
Because you're always going to have those black swan events, those things that nobody sees coming, and they can really throw a wrench in things.
Black swan events.
Yeah.
So for those of us who maybe haven't heard that term before.
Oh, yeah. So black swan event, this is an unpredictable event. It has a huge impact, and usually you only figure out why it happened after the fact.
Like after the damage is done.
Exactly.
So you get sudden shifts in consumer behavior,
Right.
unexpected supply chain disruptions.
Yes.
Even extreme weather.
Yeah, anything like that. Those are all black swan events. You can't really prepare for them. And that's where those experienced supply chain professionals, they really come in.
Right, right.
They know the market, they have relationships with suppliers, and they understand those potential risks so they can make adjustments.
That go beyond what the data can tell us.
Exactly.
So this goes back to that idea you were talking about earlier, that Poisson is a tool.
Yes.
It's not a replacement for human decision-making.
Right. It's not a crystal ball.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful tool, but it needs to be used alongside human expertise to really be effective. You got to find that sweet spot between the data and the human intuition.
And that's how we make the most of Poisson distributions for supply chain planning.
Absolutely. So we've talked about how useful Poisson distributions can be, right, for supply chain planning.
Yeah.
But they're not like a magic solution.
Right. It's not like we just plug in the numbers and we get a perfect prediction.
Right, exactly.
There's still that need for human judgment,
Absolutely.
expertise, to account for those real-world complexities that we've been talking about.
And one of the key areas where human insight is really essential is interpreting the results of those calculations.
Okay, so we've crunched the numbers. We've factored in, our lambdas, our lead times, seasonality adjustments.
Right.
What's next? How do we make sense of it all?
Well, that's where experience comes in.
Right.
And a deep understanding of the business. Because remember, Poisson is giving us probabilities. It's not telling us this is definitely going to happen.
Right.
It's saying, well, here's the likelihood of these different scenarios.
Okay.
But then we got to figure out, okay, how much risk are we willing to take?
So it's not enough to know there's like a 10% chance of selling, 200 coats in a day.
Yeah.
We have to then decide, what does that actually mean for our inventory?
Exactly. Because what are the consequences of running out of coats?
Right.
What does it cost us to hold all this extra inventory just in case?
No.
Those are business decisions that go beyond just the math.
So minimizing costs, maximizing customer satisfaction.
Right. It's that balance.
We don't want empty shelves.
No.
But we don't want to be overflowing with stuff.
Right. You got to find that sweet spot. And it can change depending on what you're selling, the time of year, what's happening in the market.
Right.
Even just a company's own, risk tolerance.
So Poisson helps us understand those probabilities.
Yeah.
But then the humans come in to interpret and actually make those tough decisions.
Exactly. That's the power of combining, that data with human expertise.
And it's not just about inventory decisions.
Right.
We've talked about that a lot.
Yes.
But Poisson can be useful for a whole bunch of supply chain planning activities.
Oh, absolutely. So, what else?
So think about transportation.
Okay.
Planning those routes. We can use Poisson. We can look at, okay, how long does it typically take to ship things?
Right.
Where do we run into delays?
Yeah.
And we can use that information to make our transportation networks better. So we can figure out, the optimal number of trucks to have on the road, or maybe identify routes that are just, more likely to experience those delays.
Exactly. It's about understanding those probabilities and then using them to make smarter decisions, make things more efficient.
This is really interesting. So we've gone from managing coats in a warehouse to optimizing shipping routes.
I know. It's pretty cool.
It all comes back to understanding those events that seem kind of random at first glance.
Right. And as we get more data and our tools get even better, the possibilities are just going to keep growing.
That's exciting. So I'm starting to see how, having a good grasp of these math concepts can be a real advantage in supply chain.
Oh, for sure. If you can understand these tools and how to use them, it can really help you make better decisions.
So I think we've covered a lot today. We've really explored this power of Poisson distributions in supply chain planning.
Yes.
We talked about inventory. We talked about transportation. Staffing. Yep, that's right. And we talked about how important it is to bring in that human judgment, that human element, to really interpret what the numbers are telling us.
And we've tackled those tricky seasonal fluctuations,
That's
right?
Right.
Those ups and downs.
Yeah, those can really mess things up. But we've also talked about how there are techniques, there's software that can help us adjust for those trends.
Exactly. It's finding that balance, the precision of the math, but also that flexibility of human insight.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good takeaway for our listeners, Think about how this applies to your work, your life.
Okay.
Really interesting to consider.
Speaking of considering, we've talked a lot about how businesses can use Poisson. But I'm curious, can you think of any ways that these ideas might apply to your personal life?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Maybe something simple like, planning a party.
Okay.
Or figuring out the best time to go to the grocery store to avoid the crowds.
Right. I mean, that's something we all deal with.
We do.
So we've talked about how this tool can help businesses.
Yeah.
But maybe there are some ways that it can help us manage those everyday uncertainties that we all face.
It's a fun thought experiment.
Yeah.
I like it.
So I think that's a good place to wrap up our Poisson journey for today.
I agree.
It really is amazing to think about how something like Poisson distributions sounds very academic, right?
Yeah.
But it has these really practical applications.
It really does.
Even in our daily lives.
It does. And I think it just goes to show how powerful math is.
Yeah.
As a tool for understanding the world.
Right.
For navigating it.
Yeah. And think as we wrap up today, it's good to come back to that key takeaway.
Yeah.
Poisson distributions, they're not about just crunching numbers.
Right.
They're about making better decisions
Exactly.
when things are uncertain.
That's what it's all about. It's not about, like you said earlier, having a crystal ball.
Yeah.
You can't predict the future,
Yeah.
but you can understand the probabilities and use that to your advantage.
So that's especially important when we're talking about supply chains.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's unpredictable.
Yeah, you've got constant change.
Always change.
Demand is shifting. You've got this whole network of suppliers, distributors.
Right. So it's about finding that balance
Yes.
between what the data tells us
Mm-hmm.
and our own intuition.
Our human judgment.
Right. We need both.
We do.
The data to guide us, but also the experience to interpret it.
Absolutely. And to make those tough calls.
Yeah. And we've talked about some techniques, right?
We have.
For refining the calculations, for adjusting for seasonality.
Yeah, bringing in the historical data, using those really sophisticated software programs.
And relying on those experts.
Yes, the people who live and breathe supply chains.
The people who really know their stuff.
Exactly.
So it's this really interesting mix of art and science.
I love that.
And as we get more data, as our tools get better, I mean, who knows what the future holds?
It's exciting to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who are now maybe inspired,
I hope so,
to learn more
yeah,
about Poisson distributions, what should they do?
Well, you know, there are some great online courses and tutorials out there that break it all down in a really clear way.
Yeah, step by step.
Exactly. And if you want to really get into it,
Yeah.
you know, there's textbooks, there's academic papers.
And of course, don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode.
Yes.
We'll include links to some of those resources.
What idea?
As well as some real-world examples of how companies are using this.
Awesome.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've explored Poisson distributions.
We've gone deep.
We've seen how they're used in supply chain planning, and we talked about that human element.
That human touch.
How important it is for interpreting the data.
I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
Yeah, a new appreciation for math.
Right.
Even if you're not a math person.
Exactly. It's a tool.
It's a tool for understanding our world.
Well said.
Well, thank you for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.
Keep them buzzing.